The family lunch in Kumasi sparkled with gold plates, laughter, and the smell of rich food. Everyone gathered around as the parents began handing out gifts. When Kwame, the golden son, stood up, their father dangled shiny keys in the air. "To our beloved son," he said proudly, handing him the keys to a brand new $1.2 million mansion. The whole room gasped, clapping as Kwame raised the keys like a trophy. Phones flashed, relatives cheered, and the pride in his eyes grew larger than the hall itself. Then it was Alma's turn. She waited, her heart pounding, wondering what could come after such a grand gift. Her mother slipped her hand into her purse, pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, and pressed it into Alma's palm with a thin smile. The room exploded in laughter, uncles and aunties covering their mouths, cousins shaking their heads. Even Kwame smirked, whispering, "Guess that's all you're worth." Alma's lips stretched into a polite smile, but her eyes burned. She clutched the wrinkled note, pretending to laugh with everyone, though inside her chest a storm raged. The humiliation wrapped around her like fire, but she refused to let it show. She straightened her back, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she stood up. In that moment, the glittering room, the fake laughter, and the shining keys all blurred. With one deep breath, Alma decided this insult would not break her, it would be the start of something no one in that room could ever forget. Kwame stood tall in the middle of the hall, keys in his hand like he had just won a crown. His voice grew louder with each word as he bragged about the mansion. He told the relatives about the pool, the wide garden, the marble floors, and the huge ballroom where he planned to host grand parties. Every boast made the crowd cheer louder, and every cheer pushed Alma deeper into her own silence. Cameras flashed as if he was a celebrity, and glasses of champagne clinked in his honor. Alma sat at the edge of the table, forcing herself to smile, but inside she felt like the ground under her feet was slowly cracking open. The whispers around her cut deeper than the laughter. A cousin leaned in to another and muttered, "Alma was never the favorite." An auntie smirked and said, "She should be grateful for even the $5. The words traveled across the table like poison, and Alma heard every one of them. They thought she was invisible. They thought she was powerless. Alma's hands tightened around the wrinkled note in her palm. For a moment, her chest burned with the urge to shout, to cry, to demand why she was treated this way. But instead, she stayed quiet. Her silence was colder than ice, sharper than any words she could have spoken. She lifted her glass of water, sipped slowly, and kept her face calm while her heart screamed inside. Kwame raised his glass for a toast, grinning at the room. "To my future, to my house, to all the parties we will enjoy without limit." Everyone clapped, their voices rising in fake admiration. Alma placed her glass down and pushed her chair back softly. She did not want to give them the pleasure of seeing her break. She stood up, smoothed her dress, and said with the faintest smile, "Excuse me." No one noticed her at first. They were too busy cheering for Kwame. But as her heels clicked across the floor and toward the exit, a few eyes turned. Her silence, her calm walk, her straight back carried more weight than any angry outburst. There was no drama, no tears, no begging. Just a quiet storm walking out the door. The laughter inside continued, but it no longer reached her ears. Each step Alma took away from that hall was a step away from shame and closer to something stronger. She knew in her heart that silence could speak louder than noise. She left the hall without looking back, letting the sound of her footsteps echo like a warning, a reminder that the daughter they tried to humiliate was not broken, she was only beginning to rise. The room was still buzzing with laughter, glasses clinking, and flashes from cameras when Alma finally rose from her seat. She did not shout. She did not cry. She simply stood there with calmness that made the entire table shift uneasily. In her hand was the crumpled $5 bill, the insult her parents had chosen to call a gift. She looked at it one last time, then slowly placed it on the polished dining table. The sound of the paper hitting the wood was soft, but in that silence, it echoed like thunder. All eyes turned to her. Alma lifted her chin and locked her gaze straight into her parents' eyes. Her voice was steady, every word sharp as glass. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for showing me exactly where I stand." The laughter that had filled the hall seconds before died instantly. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. Even Kwame, who had been glowing in his victory, felt the smirk on his face freeze and falter. Alma did not wait for a reply. She did not care for excuses. She pulled her chair back in one slow motion, the sound scraping against the marble floor. She turned toward the grand doors, her heels clicking in a rhythm that cut through the silence like a drumbeat of defiance. Each step she took rang louder than the cheers that had once mocked her. The proud walk, the calm air, the silence, it was stronger than any scream. Some relatives whispered, others exchanged wide-eyed glances. An aunt muttered, "Did she just," before cutting herself off. The parents sat frozen, their faces stiff, not knowing how to undo what had just happened. The same people who had laughed at her now watched her as if she were untouchable. Kwame tried to chuckle, forcing a laugh to lighten the heavy air, but his voice cracked. His smirk was gone. His mansion keys dangled uselessly in his hand. For the first time that day, he realized Amma's power wasn't in money, wasn't in gifts, but in the strength to walk away without breaking. Amma reached the door, her back straight, her head high. She did not glance behind her. The hall that once felt so heavy now felt small compared to the freedom waiting outside. Each step away from that table was a victory, each click of her heels a reminder that she was not weak, she was not defeated. She was choosing her own dignity over their approval. By the time the doors closed behind her, the family hall was silent, the glitter and gold around the table suddenly meaningless. Amma had left with nothing but her pride, but in that moment, she carried more power than everyone else in the room. Her quiet walkout became the one thing no one in that family would ever forget. As the heavy doors of the hall shut behind Amma, the echoes of laughter still faintly followed her, but she no longer felt the sting. The night air outside was cool, brushing against her skin like a quiet reminder that freedom waited beyond humiliation. She walked calmly to the edge of the compound, her heels still beating out that steady rhythm of defiance. What the people in that glittering hall did not know, what her parents and even Kwame could never have guessed, was that Amma carried a secret more powerful than all their money, all their laughter, and all their gifts combined. Years ago, when her grandfather was still alive, he had called Amma to his study. She remembered the smell of old books and polished wood, the serious look in his eyes as he slid a sealed envelope across the desk. "One day," he said, "they will show you who they truly are. And when that day comes, these papers will protect you." Amma, young but attentive, took the envelope and kept it safe. She never fully understood what it contained until she grew older, but she knew it mattered. She knew it was meant for her and only her. Inside that envelope were legal documents, carefully written and signed, that proved the estate her parents so proudly handed to Kwame was never theirs to give away. It had been her grandfather's property, his pride, his legacy. And by his will, it belonged only to Amma. For years she kept this truth hidden, never feeling the need to use it, never imagining her family would humiliate her so deeply. But now, as she stood outside with that crumpled $5 bill still burning in her hand, she knew the time had come. The same mansion that Kwame bragged about, the same mansion her parents used to shame her, was legally hers. The thought made her lips curve into the faintest smile. They had laughed too soon. They had celebrated too loudly. Their mockery had unlocked the very weapon that would undo them. Alma's hand slipped into her purse, brushing against the old envelope she had carried like a hidden shield all these years. The paper was slightly worn, the ink faded in places, but its power was unshakable. It was stronger than money, stronger than favoritism, stronger than every cruel word whispered behind her back. She took a deep breath and looked up at the night sky. For the first time all evening, she felt no anger, no pain. Only a calm certainty that the storm had shifted in her favor. Inside the hall, they thought she had walked away in defeat. They thought she was gone, powerless, forgotten. But outside, under the quiet stars, Amma was preparing her answer, an answer that would not come in shouts or tears, but in signatures, in sealed files, in undeniable truth. Tonight, those hidden papers would finally come alive, and the mansion that had been used to break her spirit would soon become the crown that proved her strength. Amma stood just outside the golden hall, the noise of music and laughter still drifting faintly through the doors. She held her purse close and took out her phone with steady hands. The world inside was still mocking her, celebrating Kwame, but out here the night was quiet, the air cool, and her heart strangely calm. She scrolled to a number she had saved for years but never once called. It was her grandfather's lawyer, the one he trusted most, the one who had given her his hand on the day she received that mysterious envelope and said, "If the time comes, call me." Tonight, that time had come. Her fingers tapped the screen, and after one ring, the voice of the old lawyer answered. "Amma," he said, as if he had been waiting for this very moment. She explained softly, her words measured and firm, about the scene inside the hall, the crumpled $5 bill, the mansion given to Kwame. She told him it was time to open the papers. The lawyer didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. He said only, "I'll handle it immediately." Within minutes, wheels began turning that no one inside the party could see. The lawyer called his office, ordered files to be pulled, signatures to be prepared, and officials to be contacted. The old legal documents that had slept quietly for years now began to breathe again. Every seal, every clause, every stamp carried the weight of her grandfather's will, and all of it was on her side. Alma leaned against the cool stone wall, listening to the night insects chirp, while inside the hall champagne poured into glasses. Kwame's laugh rang out, sharp and arrogant, as he bragged about poolside parties and luxury cars. None of them knew that with every passing minute, the very house he was boasting about was slipping further from his grasp. None of them knew that Alma, the quiet girl they mocked, was the rightful heir tightening the strings around their false celebration. Her phone buzzed again, the lawyer's voice clear and steady. "It's done," he said. "The transfer is already in process. By law, the house belongs to you. All that remains is for the official documents to be delivered." Alma closed her eyes, a wave of relief washing through her. She had not shouted, she had not fought, yet the ground was shifting beneath her family without a single sound from her lips. For a moment, she imagined their faces when the truth would arrive. The proud smirks would fall, the laughter would choke in their throats, and the same relatives who whispered about her would be left in stunned silence. The mansion, their golden gift to Kwame, was no longer his to boast about. Alma slid her phone back into her purse and stood taller. The air seemed fresher now, the night sky wider. She knew that inside they thought she had walked away defeated. But outside, with one quiet phone call, she had changed everything. The house that humiliated her now hung by a thread, and she was the one holding the scissors. An hour passed, but to Alma it felt like only moments. She stood outside the glowing hall where laughter still spilled through the windows, but her mind was far away, focused only on what was coming. The sound of a car engine cut through the night air, low and steady, until sleek headlights swept across the driveway. A black sedan rolled up, its tires crunching softly against the gravel. Alma's heart tightened, but her face stayed calm. She knew who it was. The lawyer stepped out, an older man in a crisp suit, holding a leather briefcase in one hand. His eyes met hers with a quiet nod, the kind that said everything without words. He opened the briefcase right there under the stars and handed her a thick envelope. The papers inside were heavy, smelling faintly of ink and old decisions. Alma slipped her fingers carefully through the stack until her eyes landed on the deed. It was new, freshly stamped, with her name written clearly across the page. Alma Mensah. Bold, undeniable, unshakable. The stamp of the court sealed it as final, as if her grandfather's voice had spoken from the grave, declaring her the true heir. For a moment, she just stared at it, the weight of the humiliation she had endured only an hour ago replaying in her mind. The $5 bill. The laughter. Kwame's smirk. Her parents' proud faces as they gifted away what was never theirs. And now, in her hands, the same mansion that had been used to mock her was transformed into her crown. She felt a shiver run through her, not of fear but of power. The kind of power that did not need shouting or threats. The kind of power that came from truth. She closed the file slowly, pressing her hand over her name as if sealing it into her heart. The lawyer watched her quietly, his face calm, almost proud. "It's yours," he said simply. "No one can take it away from you now." Alma nodded, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. Inside the hall, music thundered, people clapped, and Kwame was likely still parading around with his shiny keys. If only they knew. The celebration was already a lie. The house they toasted for, the gift they laughed over, had already slipped from their hands. She alone carried the truth, and when the time came, it would drop like a storm no one could escape. She tucked the documents back into the envelope and held it close against her chest. It was no longer just paper. It was justice. It was dignity. It was her shield and her victory, all wrapped into one. For years, she had been the forgotten one, the quiet one, the one handed scraps while her brother was crowned king. But tonight, everything had changed. Alma glanced back at the glowing windows of the hall, hearing faint echoes of cheers. Soon, those cheers would turn into gasps. Soon, the same relatives who had mocked her would whisper her name in awe. The mansion, once their weapon of humiliation, was now hers. Her crown, her triumph, her undeniable proof that silence could roar louder than laughter. The party shifted from the hall to Kwame's new mansion, the place everyone was eager to see. Cars lined the driveway, music pulsed through the grand windows, and laughter filled the night air. Relatives poured inside, marveling at the marble floors, the chandeliers, the wide staircase that spiraled up like something from a dream. Kwame walked around proudly with the keys swinging from his hand, giving loud tours as if he had built the house himself. "This will be the pool area," he said with a grin. "Here's the ballroom, big enough for 300 guests." The family clapped and cheered, raising glasses in his honor. Alma did not rush. She waited until the house was full, until the toasts were loud, until the cameras were flashing. Only then did she step into the mansion, her heels tapping softly against the floor. The noise began to die down when people noticed her. She walked calmly, her head high, carrying a neat envelope in one hand. At her side, the lawyer followed, briefcase in hand, his expression serious. The relatives who had mocked her earlier now stared with wide eyes, their whispers trailing after her as she made her way to the center of the room. Kwame stopped mid-sentence when he saw her. The smirk on his lips wavered as Alma held the envelope up, her movements calm, deliberate, almost regal. She opened it, pulled out the fresh deed, and raised it so everyone could see her name stamped in bold letters. The lawyer's voice carried across the room, clear and steady, "By inheritance rights, this property belongs solely to Ms. Alma Mensah." The words fell like a hammer. Gasps echoed around the grand hall. Champagne glasses froze midair. The relatives looked from Kwame to Alma, confusion flashing across their faces. Someone whispered, "What?" Another muttered, "Impossible." But the lawyer was already holding out official documents, signatures stamped and sealed, proof that no one could deny. Kwame's face drained of color. The keys in his hand no longer looked like a prize but like a joke. He tried to laugh it off, forcing a chuckle. "This must be a mistake," he stammered, but the lawyer shook his head firmly. "There is no mistake. The property was willed directly to Ms. Mensah by her late grandfather. It was never yours to receive." The silence in the room was heavy. The same relatives who once mocked Alma now looked at her with awe. Some lowered their eyes in shame, remembering their cruel whispers. Alma did not gloat, did not shout. She simply stood with the deed in her hand, her calmness speaking louder than any victory speech. Her parents tried to speak, stumbling over excuses, but no one was listening anymore. All eyes were fixed on Alma, the daughter they dismissed, the woman they underestimated. In that moment, she didn't need revenge, she didn't need anger. She had the truth, and the truth was enough. The mansion that once humiliated her now belonged to her completely, and everyone in that room knew it. Kwame's smile collapsed the moment the lawyer's words echoed through the mansion. His confident posture sank, and the keys that had dangled proudly in his hand now looked like dead weight. His face turned pale, and he glanced around the room as if searching for someone to rescue him. The laughter that once followed him had vanished. In its place, there was silence so heavy it pressed against the marble walls. Every eye in the room was locked on him, no longer with admiration but with shock, pity, and even quiet judgment. His parents rushed forward, their voices shaky, desperate. "This must be some misunderstanding," his mother said quickly, her words tumbling over themselves. His father nodded, forcing a weak smile. Yes, surely this cannot be correct. There must be a mistake in the paperwork. Kwame is our son, we intended this for him." But their excuses sounded hollow, their words falling flat against the undeniable truth held in Alma's hands. The lawyer simply shook his head and pointed to the official seal. The papers were airtight, unshakable, final. The guests shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. "So it was always Alma's?" one cousin muttered under her breath. Another uncle shook his head slowly and said, "And they tried to embarrass her with $5. The shame spread through the room like fire. The humiliation that had been carefully prepared for Alma now turned back on her parents and brother, burning them under the same spotlight they once used to mock her. Kwame tried to speak again, his voice cracking. "Alma, you can't do this. This house was supposed to be mine. Everyone saw it, everyone knows." He stopped when his words caught in his throat. He saw the looks on the faces around him, saw the way even his closest supporters were now avoiding his gaze. The arrogance he wore so easily only an hour ago was crumbling, leaving behind nothing but fear and embarrassment. His parents tried once more, stepping closer to Alma. "We didn't mean it that way," his father pleaded, his voice shaking with guilt. "We only wanted to honor him, but even they could hear how weak it sounded. The truth was already out. The deed in Alma's hands was stronger than any excuse they could invent. Alma stood silently, letting the weight of the moment crush them. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to explain. The documents, the lawyer, the gasps of the guests had already spoken for her. The room that once rang with laughter at her expense now choked on its own silence. Kwame lowered his head, his shoulders slumped. His parents looked at the floor, their pride shattered. And in that grand mansion, under the bright chandeliers and the watchful eyes of their relatives, the arrogance they had carried for so long collapsed completely. What was meant to humiliate Alma had instead crowned her, and the shame they had planned for her was now theirs to carry. Alma moved slowly through the mansion, her heels clicking against the marble floors in a steady rhythm that sounded like a victory drum. Every step she took echoed through the wide halls, bouncing off the high ceilings, and every guest's eyes followed her as if they were watching a queen walk across her throne. The chandeliers sparkled above her, but Alma shone brighter than all of them. The same house that had been paraded as her humiliation now felt like it was bowing to her presence. She passed by the grand staircase, the golden frames on the wall, and the long tables filled with half-empty glasses. But she didn't need to admire any of it. This wasn't about the mansion, it was about the moment. Her calmness, her silence, her steady walk, each was a message stronger than any speech. The family who had laughed at her an hour ago now stood frozen, whispering nervously, their faces pale under the lights. Kwame stood rooted in the center of the room, his smirk long gone, his pride shattered. His eyes followed Alma as if begging her to stop, but she didn't. She walked right up to him, the deed still in her hand. For a second, she looked at him with steady eyes, then spoke words that sliced through the silence like a knife. "Next time," she said, her voice firm and clear, "don't hand me $5. Hand me respect, it's worth much more." The room gasped. Some covered their mouths, others exchanged wide-eyed glances. The words were simple, but they carried more weight than all the toasts and cheers that had filled the house earlier. Even Kwame flinched, his head lowering as though the sentence had knocked the last bit of pride out of him. Her parents shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her eyes. Alma didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The truth in her words was enough. She turned away from her brother, walked calmly to the lawyer, and placed the mansion keys in his hand. "Keep them safe," she said softly. The gesture was louder than any triumph could ever be. She was proving to everyone that she didn't even need the house to win. She had already won the respect, the power, and the dignity that no one could ever take from her again. The lawyer nodded, tucking the keys away with the documents. Around them, the guests stood in stunned silence. The girl they once mocked for being handed $5 had just turned their celebration into her victory. Alma didn't gloat. She didn't smile with arrogance. She simply stood tall, her presence commanding the room more than any mansion ever could. Her footsteps echoed again as she turned toward the door, leaving the mansion behind her. But this time, the sound wasn't just defiance. It was triumph. It was respect. It was the ultimate mic drop that no one in that family, or in that room, would ever forget. By the next morning, the story had already escaped the four walls of the mansion. What started as whispers among shocked relatives turned into loud conversations, and soon videos began to appear online. Someone had recorded the exact moment Alma held up the deed, another caught her words to Kwame, and another filmed her walking away with the keys handed to the lawyer. Within hours, the clip spread across social media like wildfire. Comments poured in from strangers who had never met her but felt every word she said. "Respect is worth more than money," one caption read under a video of her mic drop. "Queen energy," another user posted. The humiliation her family had planned had transformed into her global victory. The girl mocked with $5 was now trending everywhere. Meanwhile, Alma's family sat in silence, the weight of regret heavy on their shoulders. The mansion that had once symbolized Kwame's triumph now stood as a reminder of their arrogance. They had tried to crown one child with glory while giving scraps to the other, and now the world was watching them pay the price. Every excuse, every attempt to defend themselves, was drowned out by the roar of Alma's quiet triumph. The gates of the mansion, once slammed shut in her face, now opened at her command. Neighbors who had laughed at her absence now bowed their heads when they saw her. Friends who had once ignored her calls now sent messages of admiration. Alma walked through those gates not with pride in material wealth but with the dignity that came from knowing she had never begged, never shouted, never broken. Her story was everywhere, retold again and again, not as the tale of a forgotten daughter but as the rise of a woman who chose respect over riches. And as her family sat with nothing but their shame, Amma stood untouchable, her name stamped not only on the deed but in the memory of everyone who had witnessed her rise.